Hello.
Hi, Gigi. How are you?
Good. How are you, Carolina?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Sorry. I'm just waiting for us to get settled in before I let the companies in. It's so lovely to see you. And I think it's happening at a really good time of you guys announcing Sangha a little bit more louder.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect timing.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, we launched some videos yesterday a bit everywhere. That's good.
Oh, that's
Hi,
really
hi.
exciting. Oh, you're on mute.
Hello. I lost the mute button. How are you, Carolina, from the paradise of somewhere, paradise,
I'm back in
like a paradise?
Geneva, but it was great.
Yes, I had a guy I know from the blockchain crypto space. He texted me yesterday, and he was on Necker last week.
Nice.
So
Better.
Hello,
so he
Dinis.
took.
How are you?
Dennis.
Good. How are you?
Live and kicking in the grey London scenario, but not bad. And you guys and ladies, or you ladies and guy, let's put it that way. Are you well?
Yes, we're good. Your audio is amazing. I want to check my Carolina. It's yours was a little bit quiet now that I can compare it to Dinish's.
The audio?
Yes, but and now it's better. Yeah.
Bit louder.
I think it's now it's better. Yeah.
Hello, Eric.
Hey, how are you?
Live and kicking.
That's what I like to hear. Hi, Carolina. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Gigi.
Hello.
Are we live streaming on YouTube as well?
Yes, but it's private. Because
Oh, yeah.
what I do after is I go and crop this beginning part, and then we can also this one will like all of these sessions we are recording them on YouTube.
Yeah.
But then it will be up to us how much we want to share, what we want to do with it.
Yeah. Under the ESG's ultimate transparency. It's like, what company would be crazy enough to hold their team meetings on Clubhouse? I mean, that's crazy transparency, right?
Yes, but at the same time, Eric, this is one of our private sessions because we are doing like public sessions that's just like sharing stories, and these type of private sessions so that they would feel like they're getting like exclusive insights.
Absolutely. That's part of the point.
And that's why Dinesh and Carolina, we want you to feel comfortable and ask questions to them if you want, because we really think that you two have like very valuable, practical things to share with these companies. And I'm actually going to start off with like a little poll asking them about what they're doing about their ESG practices in their company to see where they're at. And I'm going to ask you to do brief introductions, and after that, depending on the poll, I don't think many of them have a great understanding of what ESGs are, why those practices are important and relevant to them. So I might refer Dinesh to you as we discussed to talk a little bit about that, and then tying that into Carolina, the investment part, like the perspective of it. And we'll just like as we discuss, we'll just like take it from there. Depending on what you are saying, I'm going to ask questions to help get the most out of it. Hold on, we have a chat. Oh, okay. Nikki. And we have our companies joining us. I'm going to start letting them in. And then I'm going to. Do you hear the doorbell when I hear when someone joins too?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna, because sometimes it doesn't let others.
Yeah, the Zoom has that, for instance, Microsoft Teams is terrible. Even the keyboard stuff, you hear everything. But on Zoom, it has a way of isolating a lot of the sounds.
Ah. Or in the settings.
Yeah, through the settings, yes.
Very cool.
Okay. Okay, great. We have our companies joining us.
Wonderful.
Perfect. I'm just gonna start slowly by reminding people why we're here today. As you can see, we are here for a great panel on sustainable supergrowth with our competition judges, members of our community, experts in their fields, Carolina and Dinis, joining us today to share with you their experience, knowledge, and some insights about ESG's sustainability and how and why that's relevant to tech companies. And they're going to share these insights and some practical things with you. As our other companies are joining us, what I actually want to do is, we know that this may or may not be an area that you have thought about before. So I have a little poll to ask our companies how they're doing about their ESGs. The question is, when it comes to ESG practices, what is your company's current status? And I'm going to send this poll out to you. So I would love if founders, team members, if you can think about it. We're just trying to understand where people are when thinking about their ESG practices. There's no right or wrong answer. We just want to make sure that our panel is as relevant to you as you would need it to be. Perfect. We have responses coming in. 10, 11, perfect. Yeah, so for those of you joining us, we have a poll going on. If you can look at the poll section in your Zoom, if it's not automatically launched for you, to ask you about, when it comes to ESG practices, what is your company's current situation? The potential answers are: embedded ESG practices into our operations, want to improve our ESG performance and are exploring practices, and have not yet explored this topic. So I'm going to close that poll and share the results with you, so that our panelists and also the Eden-based team can get an idea of where you are. It is great to know that most of you want to improve your ESG performance and are exploring practices. And I see that like some of you have not yet explored this topic. So I think, and we have one company who has embedded ESG practices into their operations. And that's also something we would want to talk about as well. It's just, after you have embedded these practices into your operations, like what are you doing to act on them? And at Eden Base, we also want to be mindful of these practices. And as we're acting on them, we also want to make sure that we encourage the people in our community, the companies in our community and our cohort. We want to set a good example, and we want to make sure that all the resources are available for all of us to help us do our best. And with that kind of groundwork down for our panel, I would like to ask our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves, starting with you, Carolina.
Thank you very much, Gigi. So, hi everybody. My name is Carolina Casas. I'm originally from Spain, but I'm based in Switzerland now. And with my sister and Bill Tai, we've actually set up like a Tech for Good venture capital investor club. So our whole point and mission is really to take some of the trend, money, and capital flows that are going into the tech space and actually deviate that to anything that is tech for good, because we really believe that the mix of tech and impact is actually what can make a difference. So that's the model we're trying to prove. And so far, we've already funded 2 companies. We're committed to 2 more, and we're looking for more tech for good companies, as we call, to help grow and prove that is actually the best way to do tech.
Thank you so much, Carolina. And would you want to share a little bit of background? What were you doing before this, before
Yeah,
you
of course.
set that up? Yeah.
So, well, I've been on wealth management mainly in family office, and as well I worked for Citibank for 3 years. So in overall more than 10 years on wealth management. So thought it was like like I was very interested on a personal level on the tech aspect of everything, and I saw there was a bit of a gap. So thanks to Bill Tai, actually, who's a very experienced technologist and a venture capitalist, and he was one of the initial investors, like in companies like Zoom, uh, Canva, Wish, Tango, you name it. So like we went to him with like, okay, we have this like expertise a bit on the wealth management industry. What if we mix it with your venture capital mix to focus on tech for good? So that's how the idea came about, but it comes from the finance background.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I wanted to, we'll come back to that in a second, but I wanted our cohort to know that like you have this massive experience in wealth management and finance and the technology side of it, the potential impact that you can do kind of leading you to that. So I wanted to give a little bit of background information. And next we have Dinesh. Dinesh, would you like to please do your introduction? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I'm particularly interested in the ESG areas in general. Before especially the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and then ESG comes afterwards. So I've been working on that part of the UN CIGs for a long time. Actually, my company is part of the United Nations Compact, Global Compact. And one of the things that I've been working is for the last actually 10 years, I've been more and more focused on this. But I think there was actually not like one concept that you can put all in the box. So I think when ESG started appearing, and of course with SDGs of the United Nations, I started saying, okay, there's a great bridge here. And especially within the platform Cities ABC and Open Business Council, we start actually working on something that is actually still not public, but you're going to hear. So we actually, for the first time worldwide, we're going to launch actually during the Open Business Council Summit, a white paper that is created by academics from some of leading international universities, including, it was partly written by me and by Professor Kiran Fernandez, that is the Vice Dean of the University of Durham, and as well in partnership with University of Edinburgh, University of Surrey, and with people from the MIT. So we build a paper that is creating like a global page rank for companies and businesses and cities, but based on using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and ESG. And the ESG in the sense of including this algorithm that in the future, you can actually look at the ranking of organizations and cities based on these levels. So it's still, so the white paper, it's done. We actually create a couple of graphics, and at the moment we're creating an algorithm that picks data from multiple different areas. So it's an algorithm created actually by the Director of Business Analytics of the University of Edinburgh, Professor Jamal Unish, and his team of PhD students, and with our team in Tech ABC and Open Business Council. So what we've been doing is, can we pick data from mostly public data from cities and business, clean this data, put them through the lens of ESG and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and then making a simplicity around data picking on that. So that's kind of one thing. I've been working on this for 2 years now. The algorithm is quite advanced, and we are using data from a company called Ravenpack, that is a fast-growing company that is not a bit like a Bloomberg, more advanced in terms of data. And the first stage that we did was actually creating a dashboard for COVID-19 with them. And we did as well something with the US elections. So we're picking data with machine learning from public places around the world, cleaning this data, and then passing this data through this. And I think this is kind of, for me, is my work as activist in a good way, a social impact activist, because I think if we don't do this, we'll have a serious problem. And I think especially when it comes to all of us, people in technology, for instance, I had actually a talk this last week, was quite depressing. There was about what you can do in terms of AI to manipulate data and create a lot of things. So my idea with this is making sure that this data gets accessible for anyone in the world. And if this data gets accessible, that means it cannot be controlled by Facebook, Google, or anyone else. It becomes, and then we create open APIs and anyone can use it. That's the goal. Of course, we are involving more universities, more academics, but the idea is to do this like a bit of like a wiki for data, let's put it that way. So that's kind of my foot on this, and I've been very involved on this for a long time. But as well, on the parallel to that, I've been working especially with the United Nations, with actually Michael Stanley Jones. That is an interesting guy for you to come to one of these calls. So he's the guy that created the United Nations Fashion Sustainable Alliance. And we've been working in ways to accelerate as well. First of all, the understanding about blockchain, because he didn't know about what was blockchain. And I've been trying to take that. And as well, of course, my book, which Eric, to finish on this, Eric wrote actually the first part, or the introduction. It's mostly about creating a frame for countries and how to reinvent nations under the umbrella for fiduciary revolution. So I think all of these things work together. And I think just to put I think it's a concept just to provoke the audience here that is, I think, very related to ESG, is the concept of Society 5.0. I think it's particularly interesting, which is my new book, but I think it's a concept that was created by, actually at the moment, the lady that was the researcher is right now one of the presidents of OECD, as a Japanese lady. I always forget her name, but she wrote for the Japanese government a concept of a super intelligent society based on human balance and interaction. And I think that could be the concept that you should push. And I think that's what you guys are doing with Eden Base. But I think it's very important that we launch, just to finish, the ESG part and the Society 5.0. And the reason I'm putting the two things together is because the ESG is from an investment standards, and the Society 5.0 brings the different elements of society and technology together. So I think the investment standards that Carolina is an expert are key. And I think at the moment, I think for us today, there was a big
Actually,
report.
Dinesh, on that, I mean, I would love to refer to Carolina, because I just want to, before we get a little bit more deeper into this, I just want to make sure that like we all are leveled on our knowledge about when we talk about SDGs and ESGs, because looking at our poll, over 30% of the participants have not explored this topic yet, and over 50% are exploring it. So I just want to make sure that we're kind of talking about what we mean by SDGs and ESGs. And you made a great point about the ESGs being more from the investor side. And with that, Carolina, I was wondering if you can maybe give us a little bit of information about what are ESGs and why is it important from an investor perspective, and then we can refer back to Dinesh about SDGs and how they're kind of tied together.
So from an investment point of view, the issue has been precisely what a lot of people are trying to do, is like, how do you actually measure it?
And can you tell us, what are we measuring? What is ESGs?
Because, for example, ESG is like a way to have a framework so you can use for example, the SDGs of the United Nations, that they put like 17 goals, and it's like the problem is that a lot of solutions, for example, are really good for 2 of the goals, but then they might actually not be good for another goal. So how do you actually it's very hard to find the solution that is good for everything and doesn't harm nothing. So there's it's very hard actually for investment managers, because sometimes you might find a fund that is ESG friendly, but then inside they might have some oil companies, but it's actually because a lot of their green targets are kind of like green, so they fall into a category that would be considered. So that's why as well, it's hard even for us at the Sangha level to define what is it. Like sometimes we look at companies and we actually go to experts. Like we liaised once with someone from World Economic Forum that does the ESG framing for companies and governments. And we were like, okay, would this be considered for good company? Just because sometimes even if it doesn't look like, then there's underlying, for example, microcredits that they give to the underlying, so they help. So there's always like, it's hard to find what for good exactly means. The thing that is helping a lot, for example, in one of the funds we saw once, at the end of the year, they report on like, okay, this saved this many trees, this actually saved this much water. So it was actually down to the actual impact. So it was funny because it was like, if you put $1 million in this is the kind of impact you make. I think the more we can, as everybody, because I think it's the duty of the companies, of the investment, of the whole community, the more we can try to be have a purpose already to start with, because you're not always going to be 100% ESG, and it's very hard to drive the model. But I think the market is rewarding companies that are putting this in front, like Tesla as an example, Beyond Meat as an example. So any kind, like, they're exceeding companies that just don't have a purpose. So I think if you just link whatever you guys are doing to a greater purpose and then try to go a bit more in detail on, okay, this is good for this and this, it really helps a bit everybody. So at the end, it's up to us to build it. There's some established framework as we use the United Nations one, but I mean, at the end, just try to frame it somehow, or at least bring the value you think you can put on there.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's very very valuable point. I just want our cohort to like get a recap of everything that we talked about. ESGs, when we say ESGs, those are like the environmental, social, governance practices and policies you have in place. And this is something at Edenbase we really take to the heart to make sure like we are aware of our environmental impact, our social practices in terms of like creating social equity and managing our relationships and our governance policies. And Eric earlier in the conversation was talking about that we care when it comes to governance, transparency, open communication is so important for us that we occasionally host our team meetings on Clubhouse. And that's just like kind of a few of the things that, like, even though they seem like minor things, that we at Edenbase have as practices in place. And to Carolina's point, it's really important. It has been a great value point from an investor view, but it's also like we see that there is financial benefits, there is like social responsibility, corporate citizenship, like delighting customers and creating value for all stakeholders in the model of any businesses. And with that, I kind of want to turn to Dinis, because Dinis, you were talking about that some of the funds have actually seen like results from their ESG practices and policies, and I would love for you to share that.
Yeah, I think like Carolina said, so I think the point here, and I think you made a good point as well, Gog. I think the point is that, so this is becoming like a global standard for investment. And I think at the moment, for instance, today there was in the news, if you see The Guardian and a lot of mainstream media, that most of the banks are still investing in carbon polluting sources of energy. And of course, these companies will be shamed all over the planet. For instance, Bill Gates Foundation took all the investments mostly from not good ways outside of their fund, and they're trying to make sure that everything is about sustainability. So that's really a sense of, first of all, because of climate change, climate issues, and as well social issues. So any company that has this as their frame becomes more protected, both for shareholders, but as well for management. And it creates as well a much more prestigious way of looking at the society as we are. And I think that's very important, because an investor that looks at your company, if the company has areas of this, shows that you have already sophistication enough to consider this, and they can actually consider and get much more. But this is big money. So for instance, the OECD and the World Bank estimate that there's around 6.9 trillion investment a year required by 2030 to meet climate and developing objectives. As of today, the current spending on infrastructure is around 3 to 4.4 trillion dollars. So that's actually a lot of money that has to be done to come up to these goals. And the Paris Agreement that was done, that finally the United States came back again, is trying to push on this direction. And the ESG was partly push on that direction to make sure that this works together. But most of the studies, and I'll try to be synthetic, are right now. So there's a huge amount of money that we're talking about. We're talking about trillions of dollars that are right now passing to this kind of filter. And we're talking about, so most of the ESG case studies that we can actually summarize is about developing an analytic framework, rating and scoring environment performance of a company, then making the valuation adjustment based on the environmental scores, and as well making better investment decisions based on this. So that means if your company has somehow some of these frames, first of all, we'll show to the investors that you are enough sophistication, or you have enough sophistication to accelerate these things. And at the same time, we'll create a lot of opportunities for you, because there's a lot of money right now being managed through this. And of course, any sophisticated investor are right now looking at this seriously. So I think this is kind of the summary of this. I think probably the biggest thing right now is definitely how to make this mainstream. And of course, there's a lot of questions and a lot of contradictions as well between all the different things. Actually, I put a link to an email, an article that I wrote. So I think it has a bit of a summary. So if you want to go for me not to talk more, you can read, because I tried to summarize a lot of the problems there. And as well, I did a small video of 5 minutes that I think God can share with you guys. So that was actually, I did it because a lot of people say, what the hell is this? Even Google is not highlighting this enough on the search engines. If you search for ESG in Google, Google still mixes up. So
Yeah.
even Google is not ESG driven, but it just shows as well, I'm talking the search engine, although the company is trying to tackle some of these things.
Yeah, and I love that, like, we have you in our network as an activist in this, because like this is something that's really close to our hearts too, and that's why we also love having you two on this too, because we're starting with ourselves, with our cohort, but I think that's how we're eventually going to get to mass adoption of ESGs. But Dinis, you also made a really good point of like that investors are looking at this. So Carolina, I just want to ask you, from an investor's point of view, because now you're setting up this new fund that's Tech for Good investment club, and it's not social impact, it's ESG focused companies. And how do you see that a focus on ESG enhances the value of a company?
So for example, one of our portfolio companies is called Microgen Biotech, and it's actually like a bacteria that restores the soil. So there's a lot of news on baby toxins on food, or like rice being quite toxic. So the idea is that it restores the soil, so we start eating a bit healthier, so that we don't, because what we're eating is eventually going to kill us. So this is a perfect example, because now, for example, some governments are actually asking their farmers to use this kind of product, which wouldn't happen in a product that is just a normal product, but then it's competition, and then a government wouldn't be like, okay, use this kind of product. So then you automatically see as well the benefit from an investor point of view, where you're actually restoring the soil, but the business case is way stronger. Like even one good example that I really like, what I see here, Verity and Constantine from Good Life Sorted, and it's a perfect example as well. Like they're trying to build a marketplace so we can connect people that can work with elders, and both get one pay better, and the other ones can do work at their own time and help people. So this is the kind of tech for good we look for, because I think this is what the world a bit needs, and it's the only way we start. It's little things, but it's just, I think eventually the market will really reward it, which we've already seen it, but there has to be more companies so that it just shows that it's actually the way forward.
That's great, and I thank you for calling out that company, like Good Life Sorted, because I wanted to kind of point out to our companies. We also have ESGI in our top 20 cohort, who are, like, this is at the core of their business. But I wanted to give our companies an idea. Check out the resources that Dinis has just shared. And Dinis, if you have additional resources, and Carolina, you as well, please share it with our cohorts, because I think what tech founders sometimes don't realize is that they might already have practices, but unless you're really intentional about it, unless you name it, you track it, you may not know it's like significant value it creates for your business, for our world, from a perspective of an investor. And Dinis, you mentioned that there are some tools available that you're tracking the data. And I wanted to ask you, how can our cohort, like the companies in our cohort, benefit or contribute to that? How can they learn more about that?
Well, I think for now, like I mentioned, there's not global standards on this. Okay, that's why we decided to create this. But in our case, it's something more a bit about data protection and data decentralization, or at least data impactful decentralization. So I think here in the case of the ESG, so I would just touch an element of the governance, and Carolina mentioned a bit on this. So there's the environmental side. So ESG is environmental, social, and governance. And I think the environmental side, I think everyone understands the importance of this, although there's some people still denying it. But unless you live in some kind of twilight zone, it's starting to happen to everyone. Just look at what happened in Australia this week. And actually the climate change, even yeah, that we're going to have like 2 or 3 seasons per year, and the season will be more radical. And of course, right now the floods and all the things are happening, and even a lot of things related with this kind of what is happening with COVID probably will have much more iterations and complexities. But I think especially on the social part, I think it's the element that I would suggest more for startups, because you are all startups. There was, for instance, yesterday one fantastic startup that is building, and they were all PhDs, so it's a good one. I think they could present what they're trying to do for the other startups, because in the end, you're building as well an ecosystem between each other. And I think special on the social part is very important. And that's why, for instance, DeFi is becoming so big, decentralized finance, because you can actually have an ecosystem. And then at the end of the day, everything we're doing is digital. For instance, at the moment, I think all our profiles and all our track records is visible for everyone. For instance, I'm working with MasterCard in the project, and even MasterCard, they're building a big trade finance solution for startups and companies. And the first thing they want is to make sure there's a credibility around the company. And then, of course, there's a credit score. So I think this kind of functionalities of scoring companies are going to be incredible important for any investor, and for instance, Carolina is doing that, and I think we'll lead that as well, because the ones leading this will be the ones having more solutions. But I think especially from a social perspective, so it's more about examining how a company can manage the relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and community. And for instance, I'm going to give an example. I've been working in fashion all my life. My father has a small textile business, and for instance, if you are and I create fashionabc.org because of that. Is, for instance, if you are a fashion company and you have your products that are somehow being done by children, or some kind of thing that happened on that will be haunt you for the rest of your life, because if you will be in your Wikipedia page, will be in a lot of different areas, and it can destroy an entire business. And I've been actually in some business that were destroyed because of things like that, and not directly mine, but partners and companies that were very affected because of some kind of PR crisis and things like that. Then the other thing is governance. Governance is very important. For instance, one of the things I'm very careful with the companies I'm involved is making sure that when you deal with a company, make sure that the executive pay on the shareholders' rights, or the diversity of board and the structure audits are just basic stuff. And I think when you're building a company, I'm not asking you guys to go and doing like a PwC analysis, but just thinking about this will solve you a lot of headaches going forward. And of course, Eric and Daniel have a lot of experience on this. But for instance, I abandoned a company that was worth $100 million at the time, and I abandoned with zero money, which I lost $10 million. But I did it because of the governance. I knew that if something would be wrong, it would be haunt me probably for my career. Probably I did it wrong, but I lost $10 million because of that. And I think sometimes on these things is a question of, it was, in my case, it was about governance. There was not any big crime, but it was too much toxic governance. But I think this is very important, because it will happen to everyone. We are humans, even in relationships, even the people we love, sometimes we hurt them or they hurt us. So I think in business, this is very important. So I always look at this as like in a family. So if you put the rules, the family will respect each other. If you don't put the rules, you are open for chaos and for a lot of issues.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Carolina, I know we're at the end of our time, so I would like to ask you, like, what would be one last thought you would want to leave with our top 20?
I just think as long as you guys are looking at like how can you actually, if you haven't, how could you do it? And if you're already doing, just communicate it better. Sometimes as well, we find out talking to companies that they do have a for good aspect huge, that they haven't actually marketed properly. So it's both ways as well. Just like maybe look once more that you're actually, like if you're doing it, you're explaining it as well.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think Dinis also made a great point about if you're a family, if you all know that like you're looking at these and being mindful and thoughtful about these things, you'll all be committed to it. With that said, I would like to thank Carolina and Dinis for joining us today. And I would really, I mean, if you don't mind, I want to encourage our top 20 to like come find you if they want to know more about this, like how this can help them create more value for their businesses, both for their like products, businesses, and also from an investor's point of view, also for everyone in their value chain, every stakeholder in their value chain. With that said, I also want to I remind everyone that we have a panel, not a panel, a spotlight session at 3 p.m. where we talk about training and recruiting women in tech. And that you can also think about some practices that you would want to integrate into your companies from the earlier stages. And with that, I would like to thank Carolina and Dinis. And if any one of you have any questions about this issue, and how this applies to you, I'll be here for a few more minutes. Carolina and Dinis would love for you to stay, but we understand that we're at the end of our time. But thank you so much.
Thank you
I would
very
just
much.
suggest one thing is please go to the UN Compact, because every company can actually subscribe. It's actually very easy.
Is that? We can share that on UN Compact.
Yeah, just look at UN Compact, because it's a very simple thing, and putting that in your website makes a big difference. And the UN accepts almost any company. And that means you have a certification from the UN that you can put in your website. So it's a simple win. I just say that. Okay, thank you.
But that's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dinis. Thank you, Carolina. And any of you if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. Turn on your videos if you want to ask anything. We'll be here. If not, we'll see everyone at 3 p.m. for our spotlight on training and recruiting women in technology. Our commitment to social equity.
Awesome job. Thank you, Gigi. That was great. And also thank you, Carolina and Dinis, for sharing us. Just actually starting some of our cohort, some of the semi-finalists on the journey to embracing it. I love that poll data though, Gigi. That was quite, I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, it probably looks about right for our cohort. But as you did it today, I'd love to do it again, maybe with the same group in a year's time and see what the answers, the difference would be. And I'd love Eden-based to be part of that transformation, even just that. I think that really, because you think about the companies, the people working in the companies, the values that might propagate as they start to embrace ESGs themselves. And if we can be part of the process of that transformation. So yeah, so maybe we'll repeat the poll online on quarterly or on the website or something like that. That's just brilliant. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely. I was actually thinking about having another one at the end of this session, hoping that at least their knowledge about these things have increased. I hope so. We'll get feedback from our semi-finalist teams, but I think that was a really informative, insightful conversation. So thank you so much for that. Okay, then with that said, I'm going to end our meeting. Thank you so much, Carolina, Dinis, and thank you for your time and energy. We're going to see you at 3 p.m. For training and recruiting women in tech.
Thank you.